Have you ever wondered if sound could become your worst enemy? Not a loud explosion, not a scream, but a quiet, monotonous, maddening sound. My name is Marcus Hawks, and for the last 12 years, I've worked as a lighthouse keeper. No, not on the picturesque coast of Maine where tourists buy fridge magnets. My post was at Station Point Hope, 140 miles from the nearest piece of land, smack in the middle of the Atlantic. It's an old structure on 4 concrete legs, rusty, windswept. Shifts lasted 8 weeks. 8 weeks of absolute isolation. The company only hired a certain type of person, loners, introverts, those without families. Those who wouldn't go mad from the silence. At least that's what they thought. My last shift began on the 6th of September. The helicopter dropped me off on the platform. The pilot, a guy named Doug, didn't even cut the engine. He just tossed out my bags, waved a hand, and soared up into the gray sky. I watched the dot of the helicopter dissolve into the fog. In that moment, I felt a strange pang of melancholy. Usually, I savored that moment. I loved the silence, but this time something heavy hung in the air. The pressure was dropping, and the ocean was an oily black sheet, completely motionless. The first 3 days passed as usual. Checking the incandescent bulbs, cleaning the Fresnel lenses, writing in the logbook. The only entertainment was the old shortwave radio in the equipment room. Sometimes I'd connect with other keepers on different stations. We'd exchange weather reports, swap stories. But on the 4th day, the airwaves died. At first, I thought it was atmospheric interference. A powerful storm was rolling in, the sky turning a bruised purple, the station starting to shake. But even through the crackle of static, not a single human voice broke through, only noise. The ocean slammed against the pillars with such force that the station trembled like it had a fever. The roar was so deep it made my teeth ache. On the 5th night, everything fell silent. But it wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the dead silence of a tomb. And then it appeared. The sound. It was a scraping sound. Imagine someone dragging a rusty nail across a wet stone, slowly, rhythmically. It didn't come from the walls or the machinery. The sound traveled up from underwater. I went down to the lower deck, to where the concrete shaft plunges straight into the ocean's gut. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the bulkhead. Scrape. A 6-second pause. Scrape. It sounded like something was rubbing against the pillars. Of course, my first thought was sharks. But sharks don't have claws. Whales don't have that kind of methodical rhythm, every 6 seconds like clockwork. I went back to the control room, tried to fire up the radar, but it was hopeless. The waves were reflecting off the pillars, creating a solid wall of interference. The ocean was swarming with biomass, but I couldn't make out any details. On the 6th day, the scraping stopped. In its place came a thumping, a deep, guttural thumping rising from the technical shaft. It sounded like a heartbeat, amplified by hydroacoustics. Boom, boom, boom. I thought maybe the water intake was clogged or a valve had broken loose. I had to go down there. I remember putting on the rubberized overalls, grabbing my flashlight, and opening the hatch. From the shaft wafted not the smell of machine oil and salt, but something decomposed, something organic. The ladder dropped vertically into the darkness, 4 stories deep. The thumping grew louder. It resonated in my chest, throwing off my own heartbeat. When I reached the lower grating, my flashlight beam hit the water. The water was black, but it was teeming. Down there, elongated, pale bodies darted about, eel-like but moving in spasms, as if in agony. There were hundreds of them. They slammed against the metal walls of the shaft, creating that hellish thumping. I recoiled, and then one of them froze for a second in my flashlight's beam. It had no eyes, just smooth, bony protrusions where eyes should be. But it had a mouth, slightly open, silent and round, like the toothless maw of a lamprey. I screamed. I scrambled up, tearing my fingernails, slammed the hatch shut, and sealed it tight. All night I sat in the corner, hugging my knees, listening to those things batter themselves against the steel below me. The sound gave me auditory hallucinations. I started to believe they were thumping in Morse code. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS. On the 7th day, I broke protocol. I cranked the emergency beacon to full power, broadcasting a distress signal. No reply. Then I did something strictly forbidden by the regulations. I turned on the underwater floodlights, normally only used for maintenance divers. They blazed to life with a hellish green glow, illuminating the water column for dozens of meters around. I wish I'd never done it. The ocean wasn't just dark, it was filled. The entire horizon, as far as the light could reach, was a single, slowly rotating wall of flesh. These weren't separate creatures. No, the floodlights revealed the truth. All those eels were appendages, tentacles, or maybe fingers. They hung from something so massive that the light couldn't capture even a fraction of its bulk. It was wrapped around the base of the station, squeezing the concrete pillars with thousands of white, slimy rings. And then I heard its breathing. The sound didn't come through the air. It passed through the metal hull like a resonance, a low, vibrating hum. The sound a whale makes, only slower, 1,000 times slower. I realized that the hum was speech. It was talking, but my human ears were too primitive to make out the words. The infrasound pressed on my eyes, triggered nausea, made the fluid in my inner ear vibrate. I couldn't stand anymore. I fell to my knees, hands clamped over my ears, but it was useless. The resonance traveled through my bones. I cut the floodlights in the blind hope that if I couldn't see it, it would stop noticing me. Darkness and silence fell. Absolute silence. The noise stopped. The eels stopped battering the walls. For 2 days I stayed in total darkness, surviving on crackers. I didn't dare make a sound. I had figured out the pattern, attracting attention. The more noise the station made, the more active it became. Engines, generators, lights. For years, for decades, we'd been sending our lighthouses and our sonar into the abyss, and it had come to the call, like a moth to a flame. Except this was no moth. This was a leviathan from a trench where life shouldn't exist. On the 10th day, the silence became unbearable. I begged for Doug to hear me. I walked to the lantern room window. Down below, at the very edge of the light cast by the upper lens, the water rippled. I watched the thickest tentacle slowly rise from the sea. It rose and rose until its tip reached the observation deck, 70 feet above the waterline. At the tip of this appendage, a cavity opened up, a black hole resembling a pupil. The eyeless thing had created an eye, and that eye, the size of a basketball, peered inside, straight into my soul. I didn't sleep. I stared into that pupil, and it didn't reflect the lighthouse beam. It absorbed the light. I understood then that hope wasn't a name. It was bait. On the 13th day, I heard the thrum of helicopter rotors. Doug had come back, 2 days early. The automatic emergency transponder must have triggered. The sound of the helicopter tore through the silence. And from below, from the abyss, came an answering roar, a guttural, ecstatic bellow. The station tilted, the concrete legs groaned. I ran out onto the platform, waving my arms like a madman. Doug was lowering the cable. He was staring down at me, and I watched his face change. First surprise, then horror. He wasn't just seeing me, he was seeing what was rising behind the station. Gigantic coils of flesh were constricting, the water around the station churning into white foam. The creature was surfacing. It was as big as the station itself, just hiding beneath us the entire time. We weren't standing on pillars, we were standing on its back. I grabbed the cable, and Doug yanked us upward before I'd even secured the harness. I dangled over the abyss, the rope cutting into my palms. Below me, Station Point Hope snapped in half with a hideous, sucking crunch. The legs buckled like matchsticks, and the entire structure collapsed into the gaping, foaming vortex. As we gained altitude, I stared out the porthole. There, in the churning water, something white flickered, infinitely long. It lifted its appendages, feeling the empty space where our machine had just hovered, as if waving goodbye or inviting us back. Right now, I'm in a quiet room with soft walls. That's what they tell me. They inject me with tranquilizers and say it was psychosis, cabin fever, claustrophobia. But there's something they don't know. Something I haven't told anyone. When we took off, and Doug was screaming something about a giant kraken, for a moment I stopped hearing the sound of the helicopter. That low, vibrating hum from the abyss broke through the roar of the rotors again. But this time, I didn't go deaf from the pain. This time, my hearing, my mind, had adapted. And I made out the words, just 2 words, spoken by a voice that vibrates the very fabric of reality. It said, "Don't go.